It's time to do an update on this Plum Crazy Lower. So here we've got the lower parts kit sorted out. We have the detent that comes from the inside the receiver pointing out towards the receiver end plate. That's this one. Then we have the spring here and the pin that holds in the buffer. Next we have the detent and the spring that come up from the pistol grip and hold the safety selector into place. Of course, we have the safety selector. We have the trigger, hammer, and sear. We have the magazine release. And then we have the bolt catch and release. We'll replace this rear detent. We're going to replace the receiver end plate with this one from Noveski, with a quick detached sling swivel on it. We'll put back on the castle nut and we'll insert the new Magpul magazine. Disassembling the parts was about the same as it would be on any standard AR lower. I was able to do it with a Glock punch and a little assistance from the bayonet as a hammer. The only real difficult part, like it is on any AR, would be the bolt catch or the bolt release, and just drifting that roll pin is just about as much of a bear as it is on any AR lower. Otherwise the parts came apart fairly simply, and we'll then take a look at them compared with the metal parts from the Daniel Defense parts kit. And we've got the Plum Crazy completely apart now, and we've got the Daniel Defense part kit out side by side so we can take a close-up look at them. The Plum Crazy's a pretty interesting stripped lower. Again, I definitely agree with all the other people that have reviewed this thing. If this thing was available as a stripped lower, I'd probably buy more than one of them. The only real disadvantage is the trigger guard there. There's some minor things. If we look in this is a Smith & Wesson. There's a high shelf here, which basically means there's a little bit extra aluminum in this area. Where in the Plum Crazy, this is basically all hollow. And this is a pretty important area. This is where the stock is going to be attached in the upper. So you know, stresses can be put on this area. Now, I'm not saying it's weak. I haven't tested it at all, but that is one little concern I've had. Otherwise, again, the trigger guard being not only unable to change, but also just straight is a little bit annoying. There's one other small issue with the receiver, and that's right back here. If you can see how it's just starting to fray, and that's just with whatever light use it's had so far. But the nylon material that it's made out of is starting to fray. That's actually quite sharp, so you'd want to cut that off or file that off or whatever. You wouldn't want to leave that there. It's really annoying. Okay, then let's take a look at the parts that are used in this Plum Crazy lower compared to the parts that you'd get in a Daniel Defense kit. The receiver end plate does not come with the Daniel Defense kit, but I'm swapping it out with the Noveski. Let's take a little closer look now at some of the parts. So on the Plum Crazy magazine release, the button and the release are both plastic. In fact, I think even the shaft here is just all this polymer that it's made out of. Where on the Daniel Defense kit, it's all metal on this side. When we go up and look at their springs and the little detent, again, all metal on the Daniel Defense, and I'm pretty sure this is a polymer one with the Plum Crazy. I can't tell any difference at all with the springs. They look identical. The only real way I'm able to tell them apart here, the Daniel Defense stuff is covered in oil from being in the bag. Next we'll take a look at the bolt catch or bolt release, and almost identical. I only can tell the difference because the Daniel Defense has a light coat of oil on it right now. Moving over to the takedown pins, this is the rear takedown pin, and then the spring and detent for them, and again all metal and machined, injection molded polymer, or probably something like that, and more importantly the detent is polymer, and then a brass detent. And this is, I lost the front one of these where this polymer detent just let the pins come straight out. Next we're looking at the hammers there, and I'm not sure how they do it because this weighs very little, and I guess the hammer weight must not mean much in the AR's operation, but this is definitely a much lighter part. Springs are the only difference I could find with all the different springs, and that is that the hammer springs on the Plum Crazy seem to have already lost some of their spring compared to a brand new set of Daniel Defense. This is something I'd expect to see on a spring that's been installed for quite a while. The pins for the hammer and for the trigger are all Plum Crazy just doesn't have the second notch in the pin. Looking at that, the sear, again polymer, all metal on them. It's beefed up a little bit here, again because of probably the need from the strength of the material, where this is just a flat piece. On the triggers, again all polymer and all metal on them. It's shaped differently, and I suspect that again has something to do with the strength of the material, the operation maybe of the weights of the materials, but same operation, similar springs inside. I would note that this always seemed like a cheap trigger to me, like when you pick up an airsoft or a BB gun or something that has a plastic trigger, it just doesn't have the same feel as a metal trigger. So I suspect that the metal trigger will feel more like a rifle for me. Otherwise, the rest of the springs, I can't tell any difference. They're basically the same stuff as far as I can tell. All the detents on the Plum Crazy for the takedown pins are plastic. For the selector is plastic. The screw for the pistol grip is a hex on the Plum Crazy, and it's just a slotted screwdriver for the Daniel Defense kit, just a minor difference there. The selectors have the same outward appearance, however the Plum Crazy is all polymer and it's definitely designed a little bit differently. They have the same surface areas where they work with the other parts, of course. The Plum Crazy has a much different outline than the Daniel Defense, which is a more standard style. This one again, just like the trigger, being polymer detent in the polymer part, the action was smooth, but because it was so lightweight and felt like plastic, it really gave the impression of a toy or a airsoft gun or something. So that's the lower parts. Probably took a little bit longer than necessary there, but if someone's deliberating buying a Plum Crazy Lower, this might help them make a decision. Now we'll put the Daniel Defense metal parts into the Plum Crazy Lower.
The part's pretty much installed alright. A couple of minor issues on the bolt catch or bolt release there. The plunger, I had to use the polymer one that came with the Plum Crazy because the metal one was probably a little bit too large and it was sticking in there. I decided that it probably wasn't a big deal, so I, instead of making the hole a little larger for the steel or aluminum part, I just went with the polymer part for that little buffer. Otherwise, all the rest of the parts went in pretty decent. The magazine release, the magazine catch, had it was a little tight, but once the spring was installed and everything, the button was pushed a couple of dozen times, it seemed to work just fine. Everything else went together just as if it was a standard lower. My real concern is that the threads on the receiver extension or the buffer tube are all polymer, so I'd like to see how well those are going to hold up over time.
Alright, so we've got the Daniel Defense metal parts into this Plum Crazy Lower. We've added the Magpul stock and thrown in a Magpul magazine. Seems pretty sturdy. Can't get much more plastic than that. There's some aluminum in the tube. There's some little springs, trigger and hammer, a couple of pins, and not a heck of a lot more. So let's weigh this. The stripped Plum Crazy Lower weighs 4.8 ounces. The stripped Smith & Wesson M&P 15 Lower weighs 8.6 ounces. The Plum Crazy internal parts and the pistol grip minus the springs weigh about 3.9 ounces. With the lower receiver, they come in at 8.5 ounces. The Daniel Defense internal parts and pistol grip minus the springs come in at about 7.1 ounces. Now with the M&P aluminum AR lower, that comes in at 15.7 ounces together, or with the Plum Crazy polymer lower, comes in at 11.6 ounces. So to bring it about 3 or 4 ounces heavier than it would have been with the Plum Crazy polymer internal parts. So the lower with the magazine empty is going to come in at 2 pounds 3.8 ounces. Now let's take a look at what a similar rifle here. So this lower has a aluminum lower with bad lever and a Redi-Mod, Blue Force Gear Redi-Mod, and a different type of grip. And this one comes in at 2 pounds 10.5 ounces. Seems to fit together just fine on the 16-inch BCM upper. Which brings us in a 6 pound 7 ounce gun with a 16-inch light barrel. Not too bad. Not too bad looking. Little angular, but should work. I noticed that the magazines don't drop free. We'll have to try it with some aluminum magazines and steel magazines to find out what happens. Otherwise, pretty decent looking rifle. We'll get it out to the range and see how it does. Thanks for watching. Defense kit. We've got them laid out here kind of together. This is the magazine catch. This is the bolt lock or release. This is the hammer. Some of the detents, the takedown pin for the rear. The receiver end plate there, the selector. So that's basically the set of parts that are going to be swapped.
The guys and gals of GunWebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thanks for watching GunWebsites.com.